Have you ever have you ever caught yourself giving a full, passionate, motivational speech to your own desk?
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Seriously, just picture the scene for a second. You are standing there in your room, maybe pointing a finger at your lamp, looking incredibly intensely at your laptop screen, and declaring to the empty room that today is the day.
Today is the day.
Right. Today, there are no excuses. You are going to focus. You are going to become an absolute master of whatever complex subject you're trying to learn. You are essentially, acting as your own drill sergeant, trying to bully yourself into this state of hyper productivity.
And then someone walks in.
And then someone walks in.
Yeah.
Exactly. It is a little embarrassing, sure. And actually, a guy named Jake, whose experiences form the foundation of our material today, was famously caught intensely talking to his furniture in English just to force himself to practice.
Which is a fantastic mental image, honestly.
It really is. But if we look past the awkwardness of being caught talking to inanimate objects, there is actually something deeply brilliant and simultaneously quite tragic hidden in that exact moment. Welcome to the deep dive. We are talking directly to you today, the learner.
The learner.
You are someone who loves gaining knowledge, you want to improve, you want to master new skills, but you actively avoid that crushing feeling of information overload. So today, our mission is to unpack a highly effective, completely anti-overwhelm system for self-study.
And this isn't just theory.
No, not at all. We are pulling the architecture of this system from a really fascinating exploration done by the YouTube channel Speak English with Class. Now, while their specific focus is on language acquisition, particularly for intermediate learners, we are going to abstract those core principles.
Because the underlying mechanics of this system, they apply to mastering literally any complex topic without feeling crushed by the weight of it.
Exactly. We are stripping away the magic tricks. We are ignoring the crazy overnight success secrets. We are looking at the pure, unglamorous mechanics of how to build knowledge when you are completely on your own.
And I think the journey we're embarking on today is fundamentally about dismantling this massive illusion of the grind. The traditional approach to self-study is heavily reliant on those chaotic, dramatic bursts of willpower you just described.
The motivational speech to the lamp.
Right, the lamp speech. We romanticize the late-night cram session. We romanticize that sudden surge of motivation that leads to buying, I don't know, 5 different colored highlighters and a brand new leather-bound notebook.
Guilty. I'm so guilty of the notebook buying.
We all are, but those habits are a trap. What we're going to do today is transition completely away from that volatility. We're going to construct a calm, highly functional 3-part engine for learning.
Okay, let's break that down.
So that engine relies on an intentional plan, gentle input, and regular micro-output, all lubricated by a concept called tiny feedback. Visually, think about the backdrop of this conversation. Imagine starting with that cluttered, chaotic desk papers strewn everywhere, half-empty coffee cups, study materials piled haphazardly.
That represents the scattered mind.
Exactly, the scattered, anxious mind of the overwhelmed learner. Slowly, over the course of our deep dive today, I want you to visualize that messy desk transforming into a clean, well-lit architectural drafting table.
Oh, I like that.
On this drafting table, everything has a specific place. Everything serves a deliberate purpose. The anxiety is gone, replaced by a quiet, methodical clarity. That physical transformation is the exact mental shift we are engineering today.
Okay, let's unpack this, because before we can even begin to build that beautiful, clean drafting table, we have to deal with the messy desk. We have to confront the reality of what it actually feels like to be stuck in that cycle of random dramatic studying.
It's exhausting.
It is so exhausting, and we all know the rhythm. You have one Tuesday where you feel invincible. You sit down and study intensely for 2, maybe 3 straight hours. You are absorbing concepts. You are writing furiously. You feel like an absolute genius.
But then Wednesday happens.
The inevitable crash follows. You wake up Wednesday feeling completely depleted, so you do absolutely nothing. Thursday passes in silence. Friday is pure avoidance.
The avoidance is so real.
Right. By the weekend, the guilt begins to metastasize. So to compensate for the guilt, you orchestrate this massive coffee-fueled late-night cram session. You arrange your beautiful new notebooks, you write out elaborate headers, you queue up a complicated video or open a dense textbook, and then nothing.
You just stare.
You just sit there. You stare at the wall, the cognitive paralysis completely sets in, and you ask yourself that dreadful question, what exactly am I supposed to do now?
That paralysis is a universal phenomenological experience for anyone trying to master a difficult subject outside of a formal classroom. When you are sitting there staring at the wall, feeling that heavy, stuck sensation, the immediate psychological reflex is self-blame.
Always. I'm just lazy.
Exactly. You tell yourself, I am bad at this, or I lack discipline, or I'm just fundamentally lazy. But if we analyze the mechanics of that moment, those self-judgments are entirely inaccurate.
They really are.
The heavy feeling is not a defect in your character or a problem with your brain's capacity to learn. It is a system failure. Your heart is clearly in the right place, right? You care enough to feel guilty, which means you are serious about the objective.
That's a really good point. The guilt means you care.
Yes. The problem is that your operational framework is soft, messy, and entirely dependent on fluctuating emotional states. When you lack a rigid, predictable structure, human nature dictates that you will default to drama.
Drama.
You try to substitute systemic consistency with massive, unsustainable bursts of willpower. And willpower is a finite, rapidly depleting resource.
But why do we inherently default to the drama? It seems like every learner, whether they are trying to pick up Python programming or study ancient Roman history or learn conversational Spanish, falls into this exact same trap. We seem to believe that if learning isn't a monumental, exhausting event that leaves us sweating and tired, it somehow just doesn't count.
It's the illusion of productivity.
Right. We water the plant with a fire hose. Think about a tiny, delicate houseplant sitting in a plastic cup on your windowsill. If you give that small plant an absolute ocean of water on a Monday, just flood the soil until it's overflowing, and then you give it absolutely nothing for the next 3 weeks, the biological outcome is entirely predictable.
It's gonna die.
The plant gets completely confused by the deluge, its roots rot, it begins to drown, and then it spends the next 3 weeks slowly starving to death.
It is a devastatingly accurate biological parallel for cognitive overload. The human brain, much like the root system of that little plant, does not benefit from dramatic interventions.
No.
It cannot suddenly expand its processing capacity just because you drank 3 espressos and feel guilty about ignoring your studies all week. Dumping an ocean of complex information onto your neural pathways in a single Tuesday night frenzy does not accelerate mastery.
It actually hurts it.
It induces a cognitive shutdown. The dramatic approach overwhelms the brain's ability to encode and consolidate new memories, leading directly to burnout and that agonizing feeling of being totally stuck on a plateau. What the biological system actually requires is a small, consistent drink every single day.
Just a little bit.
The consistent small drink nourishes the system without triggering a stress response. It allows for steady, almost imperceptible growth that compounds massively over time. The fundamental truth we have to accept is that you do not need a perfect, authoritative teacher standing over your shoulder dictating your every move.
Which is terrifying for some people to accept.
It is. But what you actually need is a simple, frictionless daily system that you can execute completely alone, even on the days when your motivation is absolutely zero and your exhaustion is high.
So what does this all mean? It means we have to stop romanticizing the flood. We have to put down the fire hose and pick up a watering can. We must transition away from the emotional roller coaster of dramatic studying and begin constructing the structured solution.
Let's build the engine.
Yes, let's move into the first phase of building this cognitive engine, which revolves entirely around the architecture of intentionality. Now, planning is a concept that usually makes people roll their eyes.
Oh, absolutely.
It sounds tedious, corporate, and frankly, boring. But when we look at the mechanics of self-directed learning, the plan is the absolute battleground where learners either win or lose the war.
Because of the cognitive load.
Exactly. Remember that heavy, paralyzing feeling of staring at the blank wall asking, what should I do now? That specific flavor of anxiety exists entirely in the vacuum of a missing plan. You are forcing your brain to do 2 incredibly difficult things simultaneously. You have to figure out what to learn and then actually do the hard work of learning it. The cognitive load is simply too high.
Precisely. You are asking your executive function to design the curriculum and execute the curriculum at the exact same moment. It is a recipe for immediate fatigue. The antidote to that fatigue is intentionality.
But let's define that because it's a buzzword.
Right. We need to define intentionality carefully here. It does not mean having a color-coded, minute-by-minute schedule mapped out for the next 6 months. It means doing things on purpose, with a clear, specific, and immediate reason.
Not just vague hoping.
It is the direct opposite of random scrolling or passive consumption. Intentionality is not sitting down at your desk, opening a browser and saying, let's see what educational video the algorithm serves me today.
We all do that.
We do, but that is surrendering your cognitive development to a recommendation engine. True intentionality is sitting down and knowing exactly which single predetermined action you are going to take. To build this capability, we have to look at a highly practical two-tier goal system that entirely removes the cognitive friction of deciding what to do in the moment.
Let's break down the mechanics of that two-tier architecture, because it bypasses so much of the usual goal-setting anxiety. Level 1 is the weekly
A
objective.
macro.
Right, the slightly larger picture, but it is tightly contained to just a 7-day window. You aren't setting a goal to become fluent or master quantum mechanics. A weekly goal is specific and constrained. For instance, an objective might be, by Sunday evening, I will record a 2-minute audio clip summarizing the events of my week.
It's bounded.
It is defined, it is measurable, and it has a strict deadline. Then you drop down to level 2, which is the daily microaction. This is the tiny, almost embarrassingly small task that directly supports the weekly objective.
Embarrassingly small is the key phrase there.
It really is. If the Sunday goal is to speak for 2 minutes, the daily microaction might simply be speak out loud for exactly 1 minute every single day about what happened that morning. By the time Sunday arrives, the 2-minute recording feels trivial because you've been executing the microaction all week. It brings to mind the mechanics of building a Lego structure.
The Lego analogy is contextually perfect for understanding microactions. When a child wants to build a massive Lego castle, they do not attempt to melt down raw plastic and mold the entire fortress in a single afternoon.
That would be insane.
The physics of the task make that impossible. The only way the castle gets built is by snapping one individual block onto another, then another. You add a few blocks every single day. The daily microaction is simply the act of placing one single Lego block.
And it doesn't feel like work.
No. The psychological purpose of that tiny daily goal is not to achieve massive leaps in comprehension in a 24-hour period. The purpose is purely behavioral. It is designed to overcome inertia. It is meant to just get the ball rolling.
Just start.
Physics tells us that overcoming static friction requires significantly more energy than maintaining kinetic momentum. Once you initiate that first tiny action, once the ball starts rolling, momentum takes over, and continuing becomes exponentially easier than starting.
But let's introduce some friction to this perfect model, because real life doesn't operate in a vacuum. Beautifully designed study plans are great in theory, but life is chaotic. You get sick, your boss hands you a massive project at 5 minutes to 5, your kids refuse to sleep. What happens when the system breaks down? Because the moment someone misses a day on their pristine schedule, the guilt rushes back in, and the instinct is to abandon the entire enterprise. Doesn't this reliance on daily microactions just set up another, albeit smaller, opportunity to fail and feel terrible about ourselves?
What's fascinating here is how this specific system anticipates and actively absorbs failure.
Yeah.
It does not demand perfection. It demands adaptability.
Yeah.
You are absolutely right that life is chaotic and you will inevitably miss days. You will be too exhausted, too stressed, or simply too busy.
It happens to everyone.
Traditional, rigid study plans shatter the moment you miss a day, leaving you holding the broken pieces of your good intentions. But the secret to long-term mastery isn't a flawless streak of execution. It is your behavioral response in the 10 seconds immediately following a failure. When you miss your scheduled microaction, you face a critical junction. Do you destroy the entire architecture, or do you tweak the machinery?
Tweaking the machinery versus burning down the factory, that is a massive paradigm shift.
It is the difference between a fragile ego and a resilient system. Tweaking means making a highly specific small adjustment to the environmental conditions of the habit, rather than launching a massive overhaul of your character.
Right.
Let's look at a practical example. Suppose your intentional plan dictates that you will do your microaction every night at 9 after the house is quiet. But you discover that by 9, your cognitive reserves are entirely depleted, and for 3 days in a row, you fail to execute.
You're just staring at the wall again.
The dramatic fragile response is to conclude, I have no discipline, this plan is garbage, I quit. The intentional, resilient response is to analyze the data, realize that late-night cognitive labor is incompatible with your circadian rhythm, and tweak the system by moving that 5-minute microaction to 7 in the morning while the coffee is brewing. You adjust the hinge, you don't demolish the door.
And sometimes tweaking the hinge isn't enough to fix the door. Sometimes you realize the entire door is in the wrong place and you just have to ditch it, throw it completely in the trash. There is this pervasive toxic expectation in self-education that studying only officially counts if it involves a quiet room, a heavy textbook, and a full, uninterrupted 60 minutes of deep focus.
That is a very dangerous myth.
If you only have 12 minutes between meetings, the brain says, well, 12 minutes isn't enough to really get into it, so I won't do anything at all. We have to violently ditch that expectation. It is a psychological heavyweight that drowns us. We have to internalize the reality that 5 minutes of intensely focused microaction is infinitely superior to 0 minutes of theoretical, perfect studying.
That realization is the bedrock of a sustainable learning architecture. Your plan cannot be a heavy stone monument that you erect once and hope it withstands the weather. A heavy stone sinks immediately the moment the waters of your life get choppy.
It drags you down.
Your plan must be a small, buoyant boat that moves dynamically with the waves. It must be intentional in its direction, sustainable in its energy consumption, and highly flexible, allowing you to quickly tweak or ditch any cargo that is dragging you under. When your system operates like a small boat, you stop reacting to a busy week with dramatic guilt, and you start navigating your constraints with calm, detached strategy.
All right, so we have constructed our small, resilient boat, we have our intentional plan, and we know exactly how we're going to allocate our limited time. That brings us to the second phase of building this engine, the nature of the water we are sailing in, which is the input.
The raw material.
Input is the raw material entering your brain, the podcasts you listen to, the articles you read, the videos you watch. And for the modern learner, this is where the specter of paralyzing overwhelm truly manifests. We do not suffer from a lack of information. We suffer from a devastating overabundance of it.
A fire hose.
The internet is a fire hose blasting million terabyte streams of content. It is incredibly easy to experience that heavy, lost sensation where your cognitive processing just shuts down entirely because it cannot triage the massive stack of available resources. The antidote to this digital paralysis is a concept that sounds almost contradictory: gentle immersion.
Gentle immersion is a fascinating behavioral strategy because it relies far more on environmental design than it does on sheer willpower. We tend to overestimate our ability to force ourselves to do difficult things, and we drastically underestimate the power of our physical environment to shape our behavior.
We think we can just muscle through it.
But you can't. There is a profound psychological truth encapsulated in the oldest of cliches: out of sight, out of mind. If your chosen study materials, your notebook, your foreign language flashcards, your dense history text, are neatly packed away in a drawer or buried in a folder on your desktop, you will almost certainly never engage with them.
Because of the friction.
Exactly. The human brain prioritizes immediate visual stimuli. If your eyes do not physically register the presence of the material in your environment, your brain treats it as non-existent. And the friction required to remember it, locate it, and open it is often just high enough to prevent action.
It's the friction. The tiniest amount of friction, like having to open a drawer and take out a book, is enough to derail the whole plan. So the tactical fix is almost ridiculously simple. You have to aggressively bring the material into your visual field.
We'll leave it out.
You take the notebook out of the drawer and leave it permanently open on your desk. You place the short reading material literally on the kitchen counter right next to the electric kettle, so you are forced to look at it while you wait for your morning tea. There is even the strategy of writing 3 crucial concepts on a Post-it note and taping it directly to the center of your bathroom mirror.
Taping information to the mirror is a masterclass in stacking habits through environmental design. You're going to brush your teeth regardless of your motivation levels. By placing the input in that specific physical location, you are guaranteeing daily exposure without requiring any additional scheduling or willpower.
It's brilliant.
You are seamlessly layering cognitive input onto an established biological routine. When the material is physically unavoidable in your space, your brain is gently, constantly nudged with the reminder of your objective. It's not a dramatic, stressful disruption of your schedule. It is the subject matter simply inhabiting your daily life in small, undeniable ways.
But let's push back on this idea of gentle immersion for a moment, especially when it comes to active listening. Designing your physical environment is one thing, but actually consuming complex audio or dense text is inherently uncomfortable. Jake, the learner from the source material, shares this incredibly relatable anecdote.
Oh, the talk show.
Yes. He decides he's going to improve by listening to a super fast, highly complex talk show in his target language. He presses play, and he says that after exactly 2 minutes, his brain essentially stood up, said, "Nope, absolutely not," and walked completely out of the room. He just totally zoned out.
It's a defense mechanism.
But if the goal is mastery, shouldn't we be forcing ourselves to engage with that highly complex, difficult material? Isn't that discomfort, the feeling of actual learning?
That is a very common misconception. rooted in the idea that suffering equals progress. What Jake experienced with that fast-paced talk show was not the productive discomfort of learning. It was cognitive disengagement.
It was too much.
When the input you are consuming is vastly beyond your current processing capacity, when it is too fast, too idiom-dense, or conceptually too complex, you experience a phenomenon known as drifting off. Your mind actively detaches from the sensory input to protect the cognitive system from overwhelming strain.
That makes so much sense.
You might literally begin to feel sleepy, or your internal monologue might abruptly shift to planning your grocery list or replaying an argument from a decade ago. Your eyes might be scanning the page, or your ears might be receiving the sound waves, but absolutely zero comprehension or retention is occurring. This phenomenon is most frequently encountered when a learner hits what feels like a massive wall, commonly referred to as the plateau.
The plateau. The absolute bane of every learner's existence. It is that desolate, flat landscape where you feel like you are walking for miles, expending massive amounts of energy, but the elevation isn't changing. You don't feel any smarter, you aren't getting any faster, and progress feels completely stalled out. It is the exact moment most people decide to quit.
The plateau is indeed the graveyard of good intentions. But the plateau is rarely an actual cessation of learning. It is usually a symptom of poorly calibrated input. To avoid the cognitive shutdown of drifting off, and to push through the perceived stagnation of the plateau, you must employ a highly specific calibration metric. You must curate input that sits just below your absolute maximum level of comprehension.
Just below, not way above.
Right. In linguistics, this is often referred to as comprehensible input. The material should be structured so that you can easily follow the broader narrative or the core argument, but it still contains a deliberate percentage of unfamiliar elements that stretch your capacity.
The sweet spot.
If the material is completely effortless, your brain goes on autopilot, and no new neural connections are forged. If it is vastly too difficult, the brain initiates the note protocol and walks out of the room. Finding that razor-thin margin, that sweet spot just below maximum effort, is the mechanical secret to sustained, long-term cognitive engagement.
And once you manage to find that sweet spot, that piece of audio that challenges you but doesn't crush you, how do you actually extract value from it? Because just having it play in the background while you fold laundry isn't going to move the needle.
No, passive listening is highly overrated for deep mastery.
The system provides a brilliantly actionable mechanism for this. You don't just passively consume. You listen to one single short line of audio, just one sentence. Then you physically pause the playback. And you repeat that exact line out loud using your own voice, attempting to mirror the rhythm, the cadence, and the exact music of the delivery.
What you are executing in that moment is the creation of a tiny feedback loop. From a systemic perspective, a feedback loop is an architecture where you execute an action, immediately observe the empirical result of that action, and use that real-time data to adjust your subsequent behavior.
It's instant adjustment.
By listening, pausing, and immediately speaking, you are forcing multiple neural pathways to fire in rapid succession. You are demanding that your auditory cortex process the nuance, and you are immediately demanding that your motor cortex reproduce it. 10 intensely focused minutes of operating this active, deliberate feedback loop will yield exponentially more cognitive adaptation than 2 hours of having complex audio playing passively in the background while your conscious mind is entirely elsewhere.
I love the mechanics of that. It completely strips away the pressure of needing to perfectly comprehend an entire hour-long lecture and narrows the focus to just copying the mechanics of a single sentence. And what is so satisfying is that this exact same philosophy of small and highly calibrated maps perfectly onto reading text as well.
The reading trap.
We have all fallen into the classic novel trap. You decide this is the month you're going to get serious about studying history or learning a language. So you buy a massive, historically dense, incredibly complex book.
Huge mistake.
You sit down, you struggle through one single agonizing page, you realize you had to look up 30 different concepts, you feel utterly defeated by the scale of your own ignorance, and you shove the book onto a shelf where it haunts you for the next 5 years.
The classic novel trap is simply the dramatic studying fallacy applied to written input. The alternative strategy is to discard the heavy textbook and adopt a highly structured, intensely manageable 3-step reading loop, applied exclusively to very short texts, perhaps a single-page article, a brief essay, or a short dialogue.
Break down the loop for us.
The methodology is precise. Step 1, you read the short text from beginning to end entirely for general meaning. You do not stop to analyze complex grammar. You do not reach for a dictionary to look up unfamiliar words. You simply allow your eyes to move over the text, to extract the broader narrative arc.
You are just surveying the landscape to get the general gist of what is going on.
Correct. You are establishing the context. Then you immediately initiate step 2. You read the exact same short text a second time, but your objective shifts. This time, you actively scan the text to isolate and extract perhaps 5 highly useful phrases.
Phrases, not single words.
And the crucial distinction here is exactly that. You are not mining for individual, isolated vocabulary words. Memorizing a list of disconnected nouns is highly inefficient. You are looking for functional phrases, clusters of words that naturally operate together. Finally, you execute step 3, which is where the synthesis happens. You take 2 of those extracted phrases and you actively deploy them to construct a brand new sentence or a tiny narrative that relates directly to your own personal life. You either speak this new sentence out loud or you write it down.
That is the crucial pivot. Because reading shouldn't just be a passive exercise of feeding your eyes and hoping the information magically sticks. It must act as a bridge, connecting the raw input directly to your own output. And that provides us with the perfect transition to the third and final phase of our engine, output.
The actual generation of knowledge.
This is the arena where you actually produce the knowledge, where you speak, where you write, where you generate concepts entirely on your own. Now, there is a massive, incredibly pervasive myth out there regarding output. People fundamentally believe that to practice speaking a language or to practice articulating complex arguments, you absolutely must have a conversational partner.
Yes, the partner myth.
You need a tutor, a debate opponent, or a native speaker sitting across from you. If you don't have that, you assume you can't practice output. We need to completely shatter that myth right now.
It is a deeply limiting belief that artificially gates progress for millions of self-directed learners. The reality is that human beings are entirely capable of generating highly effective, challenging output in total isolation.
Totally alone.
In fact, solo output allows you to control the variables of your practice in ways a live conversation never could. We can examine several tactical approaches to building this solo output engine, starting with the most immediate low-barrier method. Self-talk or solo narrating?
Yes, this loops us perfectly back to the very beginning of our deep dive. Jake standing in his room, giving an intense motivational speech to his desk lamp. The first tactic is to shamelessly steal his style. You simply begin narrating your physical reality out loud.
Literally narrating what you are doing.
You are standing in the kitchen making breakfast, and you actually vocalize the process. Okay, I am currently boiling the water. Next, I need to pour the tea. After I finish eating, I have to tackle that massive spreadsheet for work. It feels incredibly silly the first time you do it. You feel like a crazy person talk to your toaster. But if we look at the mechanics, what is actually happening? Your mouth is physically moving. Your brain is being forced to construct grammatically coherent sentences in real time, but you are operating in an entirely zero-stakes environment.
The zero-stakes environment is the key variable there. When you are engaged in a live conversation with another human being, a significant portion of your cognitive bandwidth is hijacked by social anxiety, the pressure to respond quickly, and the fear of looking foolish.
Am I saying this right? Do they think I'm dumb?
Exactly. Solo narration entirely removes the social friction. It liberates your cognitive resources, allowing you to focus 100% of your processing power on the mechanical construction of the sentence, the retrieval of vocabulary, and the physical articulation of the words. Building upon that foundation, we can introduce a slightly more structured architecture for self-talk. The 3 daily questions.
I love this one.
The methodology requires you to answer 3 highly specific questions out loud every single day. What exactly did I do yesterday? What are my primary objectives for today? And what do I anticipate doing tomorrow?
It's forcing you to conjugate the past, the present, and the future on demand.
Precisely. It is a systematic drill. By answering those 3 temporal questions daily, you are training your neural pathways to rapidly construct narratives along a chronological timeline. More importantly, you are forcing the abstract concepts you are learning to interact with the concrete reality of your own life. When information is tied to personal, autobiographical memory, the retention rate skyrockets compared to rote memorization of abstract facts.
And now here's where it gets really interesting. Because narrating your breakfast is great, but how do we introduce actual evaluation without a teacher? The system introduces a practice that is simultaneously simple and terrifying. The 60-second recording.
1 minute.
1 single minute. Not a 10-minute monologue, not a 5-minute presentation. Exactly 60 seconds. You pull out your smartphone, you open the voice memo app, you hit the red record button, and you speak. You answer the 3 daily questions, or you summarize an article you read. Then, at the 60-second mark, you hit stop. But the recording itself isn't the magic.
The magic is in the playback.
The magic and the absolute core of the anti-overwhelm philosophy happens in the playback. Because there is one absolute non-negotiable rule when you listen back to that file. Your job is not to hate your own voice.
That instruction is profound because it directly confronts a deeply ingrained psychological reflex. The vast majority of human beings experience a visceral, almost painful cringe when confronted with the audio of their own recorded voice.
Oh, I hate hearing myself. It's awful.
We immediately fixate on the awkward pauses, the perceived nasal tone, the slight stutters. Our internal critic screams that the performance was terrible. The architecture of this system demands that you actively override that self-destructive judgment. You are instructed to listen objectively as if you were analyzing a piece of machinery, and your sole responsibility is to identify just one microscopic point of friction to tweak.
But practically speaking, how do you actually bypass that cringe? It's like a physical reflex to hate hearing yourself stumble. If I record myself trying to explain a complex theory and I sound like an idiot, how do I not just delete the file and quit?
You bypass the emotional reflex by radically narrowing your analytical focus. You do not allow yourself to evaluate the performance holistically. You are not judging whether you sounded smart or fluent. You are listening strictly for mechanical data. You are hunting for one single word you consistently mispronounced, or one specific sentence structure that felt clunky and could be rearranged.
Just one thing.
You find that one tiny isolated piece of feedback, you make a mental note to adjust it tomorrow, and then you immediately move on. The brilliance of this practice is compounding over time. Those daily 60-second recordings slowly accumulate into an undeniable time-stamped audio archive of your actual capability.
It's proof.
Months later, when you inevitably hit that psychological plateau and your brain is telling you that you haven't made any progress, you possess hard empirical data. You can open a file from 90 days ago, listen to it, and tangibly hear the hesitation and lack of structure that you have since overcome. The plateau is revealed to be an illusion. The micro-adjustments were simply too small to notice day by day, and you generated all of that progress and all of that data completely alone.
It is the ultimate self-sustaining loop. No teacher required, no expensive tutors, just your smartphone and a refusal to judge yourself harshly. And this output engine isn't restricted to just speaking. The final tactic in this phase is intentional writing. Again, staying true to the system, we are avoiding dramatic goals. We are not writing a 10-page essay. We are talking about writing perhaps 5 highly focused lines in a journal. But the strategic upgrade here is the utilization of what the system calls sentence shells.
Sentence shells are incredibly powerful.
Instead of memorizing isolated vocabulary lists, you practice deploying these functional shells phrases like, to be entirely honest with you, or the primary mechanism behind this is, or if we consider the alternative.
Sentence shells function as the load-bearing architecture for your thoughts. By practicing the deployment of these structures, your approach to vocabulary collection becomes ruthlessly pragmatic. You cease to be a hoarder of random esoteric words that you will likely never utilize in a real-world scenario. Instead, you become a collector of tools. You are assembling a versatile toolkit of linguistic frameworks that are immediately applicable to articulating your actual opinions, summarizing your reading, and constructing complex arguments.
It perfectly illustrates the difference between collecting a pile of random scrap metal in your garage versus curating a specific set of wrenches, screwdrivers, and hammers. The scrap metal is useless, but the tools allow you to actually build something. Okay, we have systematically constructed the 3 core components of our engine: the intentional, flexible plan, the gentle, environmentally designed input, and the regular micro-output governed by tiny feedback loops.
The engine is built.
But running parallel to all of these mechanics is a fascinating layer of vocabulary. Towards the end of the source material, the original hosts, Jake and Anna, initiate what they call a calm word tour. They extract 10 very specific words and idioms from their discussion, and what becomes immediately apparent is that they are not merely providing a glossary of terms, they are effectively handing the learner a comprehensive psychological toolkit.
Right, they are framing the mindset.
They are providing the exact lexicon required to change how you fundamentally think about the friction of learning.
That is a critical observation. The language we use to describe our internal processes dictates the reality of those processes. The specific lexicon they curate is designed to completely rewrite the learner's internal narrative. It systematically replaces the dramatic, emotionally volatile vocabulary of guilt and failure with the calm, methodical vocabulary of strategy and iteration. We need to dissect these terms deeply because internalizing the true meaning of these 10 phrases alters the fundamental approach to any complex long-term endeavor.
Let's analyze this psychological toolkit. Phrase number one is intentional. We establish this as the foundation during the planning phase, but it bears deeper reflection. To be intentional means to execute an action on purpose, with a clearly defined immediate reason. It is the absolute antithesis of random behavior.
Which is how most people study.
When your approach to a subject is intentional, you are no longer a passive vessel waiting for an algorithm to serve you educational content. You are an active architect, deliberately selecting the exact Lego block you need to place today to reinforce the structure.
Phrase number two is sustainable. A habit is only sustainable if its execution does not entirely deplete your energetic reserves. We must draw a stark contrast here to expose the fallacy of the grind. Executing a highly focused 10-minute microaction every single morning is a sustainable architecture.
It won't burn you out.
Exactly. Attempting to force 3 hours of dense study every night, propelled entirely by caffeine and a fear of failure, is biologically and psychologically unsustainable. True comprehension of this word grants you the internal permission to stop attempting to be a superhuman marathon runner and instead allows you to become a pragmatic strategist who understands the value of pacing.
Phrase number three maps the geography of our frustration. The plateau. This is that desolate, flat expanse on the mountain of mastery where your forward momentum feels entirely arrested. You aren't sliding backward, but you absolutely cannot perceive any upward movement.
The worst feeling.
The psychological power here lies simply in giving this phenomenon a name. By classifying the plateau as a natural, expected geographical feature of the learning process rather than interpreting it as a fatal flaw in your own intelligence, you neutralize its power to induce despair. You realize you aren't broken. You are just walking across a flat stretch of terrain.
And when you are traversing that plateau, or when your system inevitably encounters friction, you deploy phrase number four, tweak. A tweak is a micro-adjustment. It is a slight turn of a dial, a minor recalibration of timing or input difficulty. It is the precise opposite of a massive, dramatic overhaul.
You don't burn it down.
When a specific method isn't yielding results, you do not burn the entire conceptual house to the ground. You simply grab a screwdriver and fix the hinge on the front door. It is the unemotional language of fine-tuning a complex machine, which protects you from condemning your entire character just because a study session didn't go well.
But there are moments where fine-tuning is insufficient. That requires the deployment of phrase number five, ditch. To ditch something is to actively, unapologetically throw away heavy, useless expectations. You must ditch the toxic fantasy that your learning journey must mirror someone else's highlight reel.
Ditch the guilt.
You ditch the massive, paralyzing textbook that makes you miserable every time you look at it. Ditching is not an act of surrender or laziness. It is an aggressive, empowering, strategic choice to eliminate unnecessary friction from your operational system.
Phrase number six provides the ultimate macro perspective. Rome was not built in a day. It is an ancient cliché, but its psychological utility is unmatched. It serves as the ultimate anchor, reminding us that any meaningful, complex architectural achievement, whether it is an ancient empire or a vast network of neural pathways, requires an immense timescale.
We want it instantly, but we can't have it instantly.
You cannot construct a thriving metropolis over a long weekend, and you cannot master the nuances of a complex discipline in a month. It demands profound patience and the relentless, steady accumulation of micro-efforts.
Which flows perfectly into the mechanics of phrase number seven, get the ball rolling. When your sole focus is to get the ball rolling, you are concentrating entirely on the physics of the first small action. You are actively ignoring the intimidating length of the entire field. You do not have to visualize pushing the boulder all the way to the summit. You simply have to overcome the static friction of this exact moment and give it an initial nudge.
Just that first push.
A seemingly pathetic 5-minute session is entirely sufficient to get the ball rolling, because once kinetic energy is established, momentum assumes the heavy lifting.
Phrase number 8 is the cornerstone of our environmental design protocol. Out of sight, out of mind. This phrase operates as a stark empirical warning regarding the fragility of human intent. It forces us to acknowledge that our memory and our motivation are hopelessly tethered to our visual environment. If you desire to keep a specific objective alive and active in your consciousness, you absolutely must engineer your physical space so that the tools and reminders of that objective remain constantly visible and unavoidable.
Phrase number 9 is the ultimate survival tactic for the perpetually busy learner. Squeeze in. Squeezing in means aggressively hunting for the microscopic fractures of free time hidden within a chaotic schedule. You abandon the luxurious fantasy of finding a perfectly quiet, uninterrupted 2-hour block on your calendar because that block does not exist.
It's a myth.
Instead, you squeeze in 10 minutes of a dense podcast while walking from your car to the office, or you squeeze in 5 minutes of mental review while standing in the kitchen waiting for the pasta water to hit a rolling boil.
And finally, we arrive at phrase number 10, which serves as our critical diagnostic alarm. Drift off. This is the biological warning signal transmitted by your cognitive system. When the input you are consuming is too dense, too rapid, or too conceptually heavy, your executive function will rebel, your focus will fracture, and your mind will wander to entirely unrelated topics. Crucially, recognizing that you are drifting off is not a cue to double down, clench your jaw, and punish yourself for a lack of focus.
It's just a signal.
It is purely mechanical data. It is a dashboard light indicating that you must immediately recalibrate your input to a more sustainable level of complexity.
Intentional, sustainable, plateau, tweak, ditch. Rome wasn't built in a day. Get the ball rolling. Out of sight, out of mind. Squeeze in. Drift off. If you simply extracted those 10 concepts from this entire discussion and used them to govern your approach to difficult tasks, you would instantly become a vastly more resilient and effective learner.
Absolutely.
But the beauty of this architecture is that it doesn't just leave us with theoretical vocabulary. It culminates in a highly specific, actionable experiment. And I am genuinely thrilled to pass this experiment directly on to you, the learner. It is called the 7-Day Solo Boost.
The mechanics governing the 7-Day Solo Boost represent a highly elegant synthesis of everything we have deconstructed today. It takes the intentional plan, the zero-friction solo output, and the tiny feedback loop, and compresses them into a strict 1-week empirical trial.
7 days.
The protocol is rigid, but minimal. For 7 consecutive days, your singular mandate is to record yourself speaking for exactly 60 seconds. You can utilize the 3 temporal questions to guide your output. What precisely did I do yesterday? What are my core objectives for today? What do I anticipate encountering tomorrow? You press record, you articulate your answers regarding whatever subject you are currently trying to master, and the moment the timer hits 1 minute, you terminate the recording.
And the rules of engagement for this experiment are non-negotiable. There must be zero pressure to deliver a flawless performance. You are not stepping up to a podium to deliver a polished, high-stakes keynote address to an audience of critics. You are simply dumping raw cognitive output into a microphone for 60 seconds. After you hit stop, you execute the tiny feedback loop. You listen back to the audio file exactly 1 time. You aggressively suppress the urge to cringe at your own voice. You isolate one single microscopic element you wish to tweak for the following day, and then you completely walk away and go about your life. That is the entire daily commitment.
The profound psychological payoff of this structural experiment materializes on day 7. On that final day, you do not simply record your last 60-second session and walk away. You retrieve the audio file from day 1 and you listen to it. If we connect this specific action to the larger conceptual picture of mastery, the objective of this week-long exercise isn't to subject yourself to rigorous, punitive self-judgment. The ultimate goal is to cultivate the capacity for objective noticing.
Objective noticing.
When you juxtapose the audio from day 1 with the audio from day 7, you are training your ear to detect the microscopic, incremental changes in your structural flow, the slight decrease in hesitation, the micro-adjustments in your cognitive confidence.
It's about manufacturing undeniable, tangible proof that you showed up for yourself when no one else was watching. You executed the plan entirely in isolation. You successfully navigated the dual roles required for mastery. You acted as the vulnerable student generating the flawed output. And you simultaneously acted as the compassionate, objective teacher providing the gentle, tiny feedback necessary for growth.
Exactly. The 7-Day Solo Boost fundamentally demystifies the chaotic illusion of learning. It provides hard, empirical evidence that implementing consistent systemic microactions yields highly measurable progress, even when you are operating entirely alone in a room.
So as we begin to pull all of these threads together, let's rapidly synthesize the architecture we've built today. The overarching mandate is crystal clear. We must violently reject the dramatic, emotionally volatile, coffee-fueled chaos that masquerades as hard work. We have to stop starving the plant for weeks and then drowning it in a panic.
We have to build the drafting table.
Instead, we must construct a calm, highly resilient system. That system requires 3 interconnected parts. Part 1, an intentional 2-tier plan utilizing weekly objectives and daily microactions, built like a small boat that is flexible enough to tweak or ditch when the waters of life get rough. Part 2, gentle, highly calibrated input, designing your physical environment to defeat the out-of-sight, out-of-mind reflex, and ensuring your material sits just below your maximum capacity to prevent drifting off. Part 3, the engine of regular micro output, utilizing solo narration, temporal questions, and 60-second recordings to generate continuous, tiny feedback loops. And hovering above all of these mechanics is the lexicon of consistency, constantly reminding us that Rome and the intricate neural pathways of mastery are never built in a single day.
It is a remarkably robust system, capable of supporting the mastery of almost any complex discipline. But as we step back and survey this clean, well-lit architectural drafting table we have organized today, I believe there is a much deeper, more profound philosophical layer hidden beneath the mechanics. The material we analyzed focuses intensely on the act of recording yourself in order to catch technical errors and build mechanical confidence. But this raises a highly important question. What if the ultimate value of engaging in this disciplined solo practice isn't actually about the specific skill you are trying to acquire?
Where are you going with this?
Well, what if it isn't really about memorizing historical dates, or learning to write efficient code, or mastering the syntax of a new language? What if the true underlying value is the profound, intimate relationship you are forced to build with your own internal monologue? If you can successfully sit alone in a quiet room, assume the responsibility of being both your own vulnerable student and your own objective teacher, and if you can manage to extend genuine grace and patience toward yourself rather than harsh, destructive judgment during that 60-second playback, how does cultivating that highly specific flavor of internal patience fundamentally rewire the way you speak to yourself during any of the chaotic, complex challenges you will inevitably face in your life?
Wow, that is an incredibly powerful thought to leave hovering in the air today. The realization that learning how to learn isn't just about efficiency, it is ultimately just a masterclass in learning how to treat yourself well when the process gets difficult. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the architecture of self-study. We genuinely hope you take on that 7-day solo boost challenge, or at the very least, that you look at the messy reality of your own desk with a little more strategy and a lot more grace today. We will catch you next time.